Members, welcome to this SSTUWA podcast on the proposed new General Agreement. Before commencing, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. I will give a brief history of negotiations, indicate the context in which negotiations occurred, provide an explanation of the key elements in the proposed in-principle agreement, outline Executive's position, and clarify the consequences that may flow from a yes and a no vote. The first indication of the Department's intentions came in May 23, 2011. This document included a salary of 9.5%, the stripping of 17 clauses from the agreement on the basis that they were non-industrial matters, amendments to other clauses, for example the removal of laptops, and a proposal for a separate agreement for administrators. In responding to our log calling for increases to the allowances, the Department talked about taking schools off the scheme. The first formal offer from the Department was June 20th. This offer included an increase in salary to 10.5%, but with essentially all the elements of the May 23rd document. This offer was rejected outright by Executive. The second offer received from the Department was the July 18th final offer. There was a further increase of salary to 12%. There was no change to the allowances, plus there was a proposal to include some aspects of the 17 clauses to be stripped from the agreement, put into a memorandum of understanding. They were still continuing to pursue a separate agreement for administrators. Executive rejected this July 18th final offer. A membership vote overwhelmingly supported this decision. Negotiations continued with various clauses being proposed by both parties. In late October 2011, the Department indicated it was tabling its final position, and if there wasn't a positive response, it would move to arbitration. Executive considered this proposition, but was still unable to endorse the proposal. So on the 24th of October, the SSTU sought assistance from the Commission. In an initial conference, which was held with Commissioner Scott on the 11th of the 11th of the 11th, not at 11 o'clock, of course, at 10:30, at this stage there were 8 outstanding matters between the parties: the no further claims clause, staff meetings, reporting, performance management, permanency in both RTS and CTP, toil, and travel to undertake normal teaching duties. RTS, CTP and MTP allowances were spoken about, and so were allowances, attraction and retention allowances for school psychologists. Career path matters, including for school psychologists, were also raised. The parties continued in conciliation under Commissioner Scott through November and into early December. In early December, 8th of December to be exact, an in-principle agreement was endorsed by Executive. During this time, members and the union were actively engaged in a range of actions to support the campaign for the 2011 log. These actions included member engagement in a range of email campaigns, addressing P&Cs and school councils, visiting and lobbying local MPs, participating in rallies outside targeted MP offices and up at Parliament House. As well, the Union Office facilitated member activity, visited targeted MPs, met with key government MPs, arranged for relevant questions to be raised in Parliament, and developed and ran TV, radio and newspaper advertising. And we thank all those who participate in those activities. The context. Executive has to consider the context and the times in which we're negotiating, along with the proposals when they're responding to the Department's offers. They should also be understood and considered by members when they're voting. One aspect of the context was the government wages policy. This provided the parameters set by government for public sector wages negotiations. In WA, this included a minimum of 9.5 salary up to a maximum of 13.25. 9.5 was to be with minimum change, and you recall minimum change in May meant 17 clauses gutted and a range of other losses. Any increase above 9.5 had to be paid for by the agency from current funds or productivities. We note that the Department's 23rd May proposal was for 9.5 and it included 17 clauses stripped out, amendments to other clauses and a separate agreement, hardly minimal changes. There was to be no retrospectivity, there could be no negotiation on the Teachers' Award, it was to be a 3-year agreement, and to ensure that the Department stayed within these parameters, Department of Commerce personnel attended negotiations and the Minister for Commerce, Mr Simon O'Brien, was the Minister responsible for these negotiations. He's the one that made public comment, and it was extremely difficult to make contact with our own Minister for Education. National comparisons also have to be considered. We went into negotiations as the best paid teachers in Australia. With this proposed agreement, we will remain the best paid teachers in Australia. The current round of negotiations in other states is highly unlikely to see this position being worsened over the life of the agreement. For example, in New South Wales, their government has given them 2.5% per annum. In Victoria, they're negotiating on a 2.5% per annum. In fact, we believe with this offer, the gap will widen. Conditions in Western Australia, such as DOT, meetings, allowances, are better and in many instances considerably better than in other states. The economic climate, of course, we have to also consider. Both on a national and an international level, we see shaky economies. In Western Australia, we've seen attacks on the public sector working conditions and the resourcing into our own department. These attacks are continuing, and we see that we would have to deal with that in that context. There is an aspect of the unknown here, of course, when you're trying to project into the future. We're also seeing successive falls in interest rates, and they are also likely to have an impact on wages in the near future. The key elements of the proposed in-principle agreement I'd like to speak about next. The salary. That's clause 22 in Schedule A. There's a 12% salary over 3 years, 3.75% you had delivered in December, 4% in December 2012 and 4.25% in December 2013. Staff meetings clause. Initially, the Department proposed to remove the whole of staff meetings clause in its entirety. Then they sought 5 meetings without time constraint. In the latter stages of negotiations, the Department made it very clear that the government was approving the salary increase above 9.5, that's the 9.5 to 12%, on the basis that the staff meetings clause was included, and this was the sign of productivity for the salary increase. In one of the last meetings in the Commission, the Department proposed to remove the meetings clause and reduce the salary to 10.5. Details of the meetings clause include: the clause in the proposed agreement provides for 5 hours of whole of staff meetings per term. This includes the 2 hours that you're already doing. Through the conciliation process, we were able to redefine the whole of staff meetings to include meetings of groups working in phases of learning or learning areas. That's middle schooling, early childhood, or literacy, numeracy, etc. The meetings are to be used for collaborative purposes to improve school performance. The 5 hours include the current 2 staff meetings of 1 hour, so this is an additional 3 hours per term, for which, of course, you're getting the pay increase specifically. The requirement for consultation on agenda, venue and timing has been maintained. Part-timers cannot be required to attend these meetings if they're held on days when they do not work. They can be offered payment, as they can now, but even then they don't have to attend if they don't wish to. The duration of the agreement, 3 years. In relation to administrators, we have an agreement which will encompass all members. That is, there is no separate agreement for administrators. We will continue negotiations around classification and other matters as agreed between the parties for principals and deputy principal conditions. Any agreed changes will be incorporated into a schedule in this agreement. This is an important focus on school principals and deputies. In relation to the allowances, we've maintained the list of all schools receiving RTS, CTP and MTP allowances. The grandparent schools have been retained. and for the first time we will have an annual increase to RTS and CTP Band A, B and C allowances. The increases are 3% in 2011 December, 3.25 December 2012 and 3.25 December 2013. These increases will commence with back pay from the date of registration if the agreement is endorsed. Reporting was a big concern to us. We now have a reporting clause back in the agreement. There will be a continuation of a limit to 2 formal reports per year. Consultation with the union will be required if changes are proposed. The agreed position between the parties with regard to comments on reports that we had through the Commission is to be placed in an appendix to the policy. Permanency. Clauses at RTS and CTP in particular. Please note the fundamental obligation of the Department to permanency continues and is captured in Clause 7 of the Teachers' Award. This restricts the use of fixed-term appointments. In the RTS and CTP, permanency on appointment for substantive vacancy appointments will continue. In the RTS, CTP and MTP, the Department has committed to assist employees in fixed-term positions to continue employment in such locations to assist them in working towards permanency. Monitoring of permanency will continue with reporting to the union. This is extremely important. The flexible operation of secondary schools. This clause has a clause which provides for 9 senior colleges to extend hours to 9 p.m. 2 of these senior colleges, Canning and Tuart, have been operating this system for a long time. Originally, the Department proposed the time be extended to 10 p.m. and also that it be available to all schools. The current protections that teachers cannot be required to work these hours, that there'll be no split shifts, that consultation requirements exist about any such proposal and conditions will be protected and maintained have been included. We have clauses around new state and federal initiatives, and combined with the ERIC clause, these clauses require the Department to establish mechanisms to report on intentions and proposed changes. There's a requirement to consult on these national and state government initiatives through ERIC and other forums. With regard to workload, support, they are key matters to be considered in these new initiatives. The area of early childhood has a particular focus, and there are obligations to engage with the union around transition, arrangements for teachers with the need for new qualification requirements. In relation to Australian curriculum, Clause 54 and Clause 44 professional learning, there are commitments to support, including professional learning and curriculum support material provision. These matters are also covered in ERIC, professional learning courses and Australian curriculum clauses. We successfully rejected an attempt by the Department to put in a no further claims clause, which would have said effectively this agreement was in full payment for all past productivity. In this proposed replacement agreement, we have retained most aspects the Department attempted to strip from the agreement in May 2011. Executive's position. Executive has endorsed the in-principle agreement and advises members to vote yes. In doing so, Executive is strongly of the view that the outcomes in the context of the current negotiating climate are the best that could be achieved at this point in time. The context that they have considered are the government wages policies, settlements with other public sector unions, the lack of teacher shortage pressures at this particular time, the comparisons with other states, such as best paid and the conditions, the broad international and economic landscape. Executive and the negotiating team have also seen off a savage attack by the Department and Government in its proposal to strip 17 significant clauses from our agreement and to amend others, and to separate teacher and administrator conditions, and to attempt to characterise some matters as non-industrial. We indicated when presenting details of the proposed changes to staff meetings that we would provide further details about executives' deliberations on this matter. In the clause, we have worked very hard to provide flexibility in this clause. Consultation with staff, time period for meetings can be varied, so you could have a 2-hour meeting and a 3-hour meeting, 5 lots of half-hour meetings, etc. The meetings can be whole of staff or small group. It is conceivable that a school may not always need the 5 hours in one term. The focus of the meetings is to be on school improvement. This gives a capacity to ensure that the meetings are for meaningful purposes. The department presented evidence on practice in other states when we were discussing this meetings clause. Some states there are no constraints. Some have weekly requirements. If we take this into arbitration along with the best paid aspect, this would likely create some difficulties for us. The results of the review of the teacher workload would also require strong arguments and evidence to be developed to provide a counter to this research. Current practices in schools with regard to early close, professional development and collaborative meetings outside of school hours also would be factored in. In relation to workload, the ability to look at workload as a counter or a buffer to adding beyond this time and any trade-off arrangements. In summary, this proposed agreement delivers a salary increases which will ensure WA classroom teachers remain as the best paid in Australia, and as I said, actually with an even bigger gap. The annual allowance increases for RTS bands A, B and C schools for the life of the agreement. A first has been achieved while strongly resisting proposals to either reduce the number of schools in these schemes or to cut salary for everybody. Extra funds were provided by government to cover these increases. In maintaining a single agreement for teachers and administrators has been a fundamental objective, including a clause which will allow for further negotiations pertaining to schools classification, workload and responsibilities and duties of principals and deputies. Our administrators are not the best paid in Australia, and at the same time they are seeing significant transfer of responsibilities, accountabilities and workload without any adjustments, for example, to conditions and supports. Resisting the proposal to remove a significant number of clauses on the basis that they are non-industrial matters, including new clauses or amendments to clauses which provide for consultation on new state and federal initiatives, as well as commitments to appropriate support. The consequences of the yes and no vote are what I want to talk about next. Arrangements, if it's a yes vote, arrangements will be made to finalise the document and register it in the Commission. We will meet with the Department to set the parameters for progress of matters such as ongoing negotiations for administrators. Adjustments will be made to relevant union documents on working conditions. There will be training for union reps, activities to raise awareness of members and to support expectations in terms of compliance in work sites through staff meetings and branch actions, and WACs and reporting to unions and grievances will be established. Monitoring mechanisms for implementation and follow-up where breaches occur will also be established. If we have a no vote, we will need to prepare for arbitration, including developing an enterprise order, identifying witnesses and preparing witness statements. There will be time delays. The Department will also be preparing an enterprise order. This brings the risk of going back to square one, for example, a separate agreement for administrators, removing or increasing the meetings clause, reducing salary, cutting back on CTP and MTP locations. Of course, there will be legal and other costs for the union associated with arbitration, and they will be significant. Delays in the beneficial parts of the proposed agreements, including increases in the allowances and obligations to consult and provide resources, will occur. Diversion of senior officers and industrial staff to arbitration preparation will also occur. In relation to voting, we've spent the first 5 weeks, or we will be spending the first 5 weeks, out helping members to understand the elements of the agreement. Information packs have been sent to work sites. The in-principle agreement and explanatory notes are on our Building the Future website. Many forums and school visits have been held and will be held in the next couple of weeks. During weeks 6 and 7, voting should be occurring in branches. The results of the branch and the worksite votes must be returned to the union office by the close of business on Friday the 16th of March. Please ensure that the members at your worksite understand the details of the proposal, the context and the consequences prior to casting a vote. If you need further advice, please contact the union and we will assist you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast.